Everyone is doing well. My name is Margaret Mitchell, and I'm President and CEO for the YWCA in Greater Cleveland. And it is very exciting to be here this morning. We're talking about something very near and dear to me, which is voting along with the census. I don't think I've ever shared this before, but when I was a little girl, my house was a polling place in Fresno, California. My parents were passionate about the right to vote and exercising that right. And I got to see that up close and firsthand as a little girl. And my birthday is actually November 6th. And so my birthday would often fall around election day. And so it was always an amazing, amazing time. I'm so glad that you are able to join us for Go Live for Equity. Last week, we had an amazing conversation around public health with Ivanka Hall and Danielle Sidnor. Certainly, COVID-19 and racism, we can see are intrinsically intertwined, and the numbers have continued to grow disproportionately over the last few weeks. It is alarming. We came out of that meeting with an action plan, really being able to identify that we wanted to put together a one-pager for the African-American community for all of us to be able to download and share. And we are in process of putting that together. You will know as soon as that is done, and we have that out to you. You will be the first to know. So I am excited about Go Live for Equity. It's really come out of our 21-day challenge. We had over 3,500 people doing the challenge with us across the country. And we talked about not only public health, but education and the criminal justice system, and of course, voting and the census. During the challenge, we looked at voter suppression historically, as well as what's happening today. We looked at the suffrage movement and how white women had not welcomed African-American women and other women of color into the suffrage movement. And it was a very, very impactful week. And I am thrilled that we are able to, through Go Live for Equity, continue the conversation today. And I am pleased to be able to introduce two amazing individuals. We have with us Marsha Maccabee, who is president and CEO of the Urban League. She is the first woman to be president of the Urban League in its 103-year history, which is amazing. I mean, just sit with that for a moment. She works obviously tirelessly. The Urban League is a legacy civil rights organization, and she works tirelessly on that front here in Cleveland. But she's also very involved at a state level, working for state initiatives, including the census, and has been very involved at the state level, appointed by Governor DeWine to work on the census, the 2020 census. And also with us this morning is Devonte Dickey. Devonte is the advocacy and engagement coordinator for Cleveland Votes. He is a force, and he is currently working on co-designing for Cleveland Votes its equity civic engagement framework. And so I'm so glad that he's going to be able to share more about that framework today, but it is definitely engaged to reimagine and redesign and address structural and systematic and institutional barriers resulting from the apathy in civil engagement. And I am terrified, absolutely terrified of that apathy today. He is a member of the Civic Technology Initiative around combating social injustices through the power of technology and data. And I'm so thrilled to be able to have Devonte with us this morning. I do want you to know that you can engage with us through the chat button. We've got a large number of folks with us, and so please feel free to join along with the chat and engage. It was an amazing conversation last week, and we know that it's going to be just as wonderful this week. COVID-19, there's no question, has impacted voting and the census. We were scheduled in Ohio to vote on March 17th, and we did not conclude our election until, was it April 28th? And so there's no question that we have a lot of watchful eyes on the general election coming this November, November 3rd, I believe. And the census has also been delayed. And Marcia, I would love for you to give us a sense of where we are with the census, what the numbers look like, when will we conclude the census. You know, I just want to hear from you. I know you've got your arms around this topic.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Margaret. And thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to share with our community and for your leadership in this portion of the Vineyard. I salute you. In terms of the what's going on with the census, and I'm pleased to be a part of the Governor's 2020 Complete Count Commission. We are here in Cuyahoga County about 59% completed in our self-reporting. Now, that's for all of Cuyahoga County. In Cleveland, we are 43% complete, which is concerning. And in East Cleveland, it's only 29% completed. So that, you know, when we think about the need to make sure that the African American community is counted, those numbers are of a great concern. Of course, we know COVID-19 has affected everything in this country. And so what is happening on the census arena is that, of course, all operations stopped, as happened in most areas. But June 1st, the field operations offices are planning to reopen.
Okay.
So those are going to be planning to reopen and the activities to begin again. But of course, with social distancing, the way in which the field operations offices can operate is going to be quite a bit different as we're all getting back to a new normal based on COVID-19. The entire census timeframe has been extended now through October 31st of 2021, so that between June and October, visits can be made by the enumerators to homes. People can continue to self-report either via their online or by telephone or by mail. So there's 3 ways that people can respond. Once October 31st comes, then the census teams have until April 31st of 2021 to get a report to the president around the census so that all of the redistricting data can be delivered no later than July 31st, 2021. And given that this conversation is both about voting and the census, we're going to see how closely tied these things are, because representation is dictated also by the census. So it's very, very important that we be counted, and especially in our communities, we must be counted so that we can affect representation, because I think at no other time than now, we can see that our representation at both the local, the state, and the federal level really dictate what happens to our lives more than ever.
Absolutely. And Mitchell, may I also just, Margaret, I'm sorry, may I also just add another comment related to what Ms. Marcia just mentioned related to the census? So I just want to highlight the number that Miss Marcia just indicated, which is the 43%. You're talking about out of a state of, or out of a city slightly under 400,000 people, like the amount of money that we are potentially losing is just like astronomically high, astronomical. If we were to take that number, multiply it times our city population, you end up getting about $395 million that are lost per year. Because once again, if you're talking about 43% of our city population times the $1,814 that is lost per person for 10 years, you end up getting $395 million for 10 years. So it just once again highlights what Ms. Marcia is indicating about the number of resources that we could potentially lose if we do not get an accurate count for the 2020 census.
Thank you. And just to add, I love this. Thank you. Hi, Devonta. How are you doing today? Great. Good to see you on, and glad to dialogue with you. So the other thing that I think people are not as aware of is that the federal government actually relies on the data that comes from the census to sort of plan out how they will deal with discrimination issues, how civil rights issues and those kinds of things. And remember what's so important, that whatever snapshot is taken in this year, we will have to live with the impacts of that snapshot for 10 years. Babies have to be counted. Everyone in the household needs to be counted. And it is just so critical, whether they're a family member or not. If they're living there, they get counted. Homeless get counted. Everybody, and all kinds of services that we need in our community. And if we see the devastation that's happened from COVID-19, the services that our communities are going to need for a number of years are going to be critical. And we want to make sure that those services come equitably into our communities.
Let's pivot to, just thinking about some solutions that we can get people out. I mean, we need to activate ourselves in order to, tap on our neighbor. Have you taken the census? What are some of the things that we can do individually and collectively as community? What are you seeing among other groups, both Cleveland Votes as well as Urban League, locally, nationally? Let's hear some solutions to help activate folks, because this is absolutely so critical. 10 years, $395 million. We are going to feel this. Absolutely. And it's just going to be devastating for us.
Absolutely. And so I did see a question pertaining to my comment about the $395 million. I do want to just clarify and mention that that is $395 million per year for 10 years. So multiply that number times 10.
My goodness.
Because once again, you're talking about the $1,814 per person for 10 years. Because as Ms. Marcia just mentioned, we utilize the census data for 10 years. So in other words, we create our district maps based for the next 10 years. We utilize, this to determine our literal political representation, as well as the amount of funds that are allocated from the federal level to the state level and then to the local level. And of course, if there's a historical undercount of minorities and a significant historical overcount for our melanin deficient counterparts, then of course those dollars end up going to it doesn't go to our communities and our historically disenfranchised communities in order to elevate, development and so forth. But in terms of your latter question pertaining to solutions, we as Cleveland Votes, we have actively been working with not only our complete count subcommittees for both the city and the county to develop, not only a series of personas, in other words, creating this visually centric campaign. We definitely realized through a panoply of technical assistance sessions and meetings with our partners. Thank you so much, Erica. We definitely realized that a lot of the information that was deployed from the U.S. Census Bureau was not speaking to our hard to count populations. And by hard to count populations, I mean those who are transient, those who are part of the ADA community, those who in which English is their second language, and so forth. We definitely realized that we needed to first take a step back and determine, like, one, who are those hard to count populations, and then three, collaboratively working with our partners to ensure that the information that we're getting from the U.S. Census Bureau can be easily digestible. This then resulted in, as I mentioned before, technical assistance meetings, sessions with our partners, crafting these infographics, personas. And with each of these personas, you will see some of the zip codes based upon the 2010 census data that indicates the 2010 census data that had the highest, lowest, response rate, and then aligning, the demographics, the information pertaining to roads, streets, education, healthcare, because once again, these are four major services that all of us use. We are all connected by healthcare. We're all connected by education. We're all connected by streets and roads. So when we're talking about the census pertaining to these four elements, you're much more inclined to listen and learn about the significance of the census. And then, of course, as of right now, pertaining to COVID, a lot of our partners, prior to COVID, was very much planning to do a lot of, in-person engagement. But due to COVID, we now have to pivot in support of a lot of our partners into getting into the digital realm and into the digital space. So how do you continue to elevate the census and its significance, as well as the voting process and the voter registration process in preparations for the general election in the digital space? And so we're actively working with partners to create, creative and fun and interactive, opportunities for our partners to talk about these two elements on social media and beyond.
Thank you.
So to add to what has been said already, and I see a number of questions here on the screen. What we have pivoted to, the National Urban League has a movement that is called Make Black Count. And so it is a movement-wide approach, and it's digitally formulated, which is so important for this time. But here's the other thing. We see every day, pretty much on TV, how food is being handed out to individuals who are food insecure right now. And so what we're doing is we have to go to where the people are. So we are going to where food is being handed out and passing out information there, encouraging people to fill out their census. If they need help calling in, because they can also call in by phone, and those kinds of things. If they need help with doing it online and they just don't know how, but they have access, we can help there. In addition to that, we just need to be ambassadors in our communities, because even though our churches are very, very, and our houses of worship, whatever they may be, are very challenged right now. Many of them are doing some kind of digital outreach. So we want to make sure that those entities and our social and civic organizations are reaching out and encouraging people. The best thing that this audience and those of us who are galvanized around this work can do right now is be ambassadors and drum majors for this cause. Everywhere we go, we need to be talking about, have you filled out the census? Have you completed the census? And do you need help? We need to be there to be that voice to encourage people. I think the other thing is, someone noted on the chat that there were places in the community that have already committed. So Dave's Supermarkets have committed that we can actually have census data there. And we work very closely. The Urban League works very closely with the Census Bureau. We work hand in hand. The other thing that's going on is, I mentioned this June 1st date when the field offices will be getting back up and running. many of the people who had been hired to be enumerators were hired back in February and March prior to the pandemic hitting and the stay-at-home orders. Some of those folks are not now going to be available still for those jobs. So as a result of that, the Urban League is going to be doing a virtual job fair for the census within the next 10 days. And we'll be targeting those communities that are severely undercounted, because we know that people will talk to people that they know and trust in their communities. That is critical. We can't just send anybody to knock on doors, especially at this time when there's so many scam things going on, and there's so much crime and other things that cause mistrust. We got to have people in those communities that people know and trust knocking on those doors.
Absolutely.
So we're going to also be working with that. And I would just say, I have buttons that say, "Be counted, check Ohio." And we can get those out to folks and just be a walking advertisement all the time about the census, and of course, voting, which we're going to also talk about, that they go hand in hand. Very, very important.
Absolutely.
Is the mobile app easy to use for the census?
I'm sorry.
The mobile
phone? By phone, is that easy to do?
I believe that it is. I mean, I believe that it's doable, and certainly the online application for those that can, have access to online, it's 9 questions. It takes 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Now, of course, it gets longer depending on if you have more people in the household, but for someone that has from 2 to 4 or 5 people in the home, it only takes about 10 to 12 minutes to complete. So, it's easy to do.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend. I know a number of our U.S. Census partnership specialists that work specifically in Cleveland have indicated the influx of people calling. And so just making sure we are acknowledging that they are also actively trying to expand their operations due to the influx of calls. So with that said, if you are utilizing, mobile phones to call in to complete your census, just to also anticipate that. But of course, if you want to do it the most seamless way, of course, if you have digital access, by all means, go to my census2020.gov to complete the census.
Also, someone put up a comment about our Latinx community and the concerns with respect to how the Latinx community is being treated with respect to immigration, and obviously the fears that they have. What we are trying to do is really reassure everyone that by federal law, the census data cannot be used for anything but to be turned over for completion of data that is absent names, absent, individual identification, for the pooling of information by geographic areas. So, I know that this is a very sensitive area for our Latinx community, and as it is also because we have concerns for returning citizens and others who think that perhaps, child care enforcement folks will come after, or collections people, or those kinds of things, landlords. But we want to assure people that this data can go nowhere but through the census channels and be calculated as data for the census, and for no other reason. It can be not turned over to any other agencies or any other entities. So we have to just also keep pressing that. And I would encourage you all to go on to the Cuyahoga County website, where our county executive did a very nice video talking about the importance of the census. And he also impresses upon the fact that the data is secure and cannot be used in any other ways.
And Miss Marshall, what I absolutely appreciate you elevating is, once again, what it truly means to, like, when we say the term like meet communities where they are, or, you know, having to acknowledge trusted messengers. Oftentimes the same thing what we do pertaining to, you know, our work with Cleveland Votes and us building our equitable civic engagement framework, we're always talking about equity building. And so we acknowledge that we can't just have any organization or any partners enter these spaces and assume that they are the trusted messengers. So instead, it's a matter of us having to work very strategically and elevating our Latinx organizer and our Latinx, like, you know, trusted messengers who actually, in fact, knows their population like the back of their hand, because these are their family and friends, and us serving as that convener and that educator, providing them the necessary, most ethical and most accurate content pertaining, and most, you know, and updated content about the census, and then allowing them, you know, to then go back to their respective homes and talk about the census, and us serving as that, you know, as that supporter from behind the scenes. Because once again, we have to acknowledge that voting and the census, like, it is a very personable experience. And so we can't assume that we can just step into these environments and step into these communities and say like, hey, complete the census. When we don't, in fact, know all of the trials, tribulations, and ramifications and vulnerability that may in fact exist by someone having a fear to wanting to complete the census. And so it's us having to thoroughly acknowledge, like, what does it mean when we say these, you know, very casual statements, and we have these very casual directives to our community partners, as well as to the, you know, hard to count populations.
I think, you know, and obviously this is a session among the willing, right? Everybody on this call, did the survey, and over 90% of us have already taken the census. And so, you know, we are the soldiers in this fight. We are the advocates. You know, Marcia has entrusted us to carry this forward. There are several questions about schools, and I think that schools and teachers are another great resource. And we need to continue. We encourage you, we're activating you to take these steps in your community. These questions are excellent, and we're asking that you activate them forward. It is so important for us to be able to get this word out. I love Make Black Count. We will share that through our YWCA network, both locally as well as statewide. And Cleveland Votes, we will get your website and information out as well. This is critically, critically important. Marcia, when is the census closing up? When is the final timeline, the revised timeline now?
So that's October 31st, Margaret, will be the final data collection and self-response time. And Margaret, there's a couple of critical questions that I see.
Yes.
May I just, okay. One is, someone asked about, will any of this data go to ICE or to any other kind of
Federal agency? Federal
agency, right? The answer is no. So I just want to, say that again. And then another person raised a question that I think is interesting for us to address. And that is, when you make your selection of your identity, someone said, as a white person, it was a little difficult for me to respond. Okay, is it the same for African Americans? That's why we made it very simple with our Make Black Count message through the National Urban League. It's important in African American community that individuals check Black. Now, clearly, for those who are have other heritage mixed in there, can certainly also, include that. But the Make Black Count is there for a reason and a purpose. And so that's very, very important. So Thank you for that question.
This is so, Go ahead, Devontae.
Now, I'm just going to quickly say there are also a number of questions in the Q&A portion. I love that people are like using both of them. It's like, having to get on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
So the one question I did want to answer that I see keeps popping up is pertaining to schools and connecting with particularly CMSD. We can, if you reach out to us at info@clevos.com, we can definitely connect you with the respective city and county complete count subcommittee, because I know that they are doing a number of efforts or playing a number of efforts to elevate the census for students.
And I can also tell you that I work on a statewide committee with all of the Big 8 school districts and their superintendents. And so we are also working with them. There was a lot of work done before COVID hit in terms of the schools. And the approach the schools were taking was to get students to take information home to their parents, to encourage their parents to fill out the census. So that was pretty much the strategy that schools were using at that time. And certainly through social media and through technology platforms, I think we can continue to reinforce that message.
Absolutely.
Marcia, I didn't get a chance to look at this, but do you know off the top of your head for 2010, for the year 2010,
Yes.
what did the data reveal in terms of Cleveland specific?
You know, I don't have the Cleveland specific right before me. I'm sorry, Margaret, but I do have for the state of Ohio.
Great.
And I will tell you that because we got a comparison for the state of Ohio versus what it looks like now. So for Ohio, we had an 83.1% return. 83.1% return. 80.9, 80.9, and a 62.5% return thus far in Ohio. So we can get the data and have it sent out to everybody. So
and I believe, and of course I will be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our number was around like 60% in 2010.
Wow.
Like roughly, roughly.
I know it was low. Yeah, I know it was low.
Well, I just want to pivot to voting. I did get a chance to be in Alabama. This was the 55th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, and so in March, and I happened to be in early March in Alabama, in Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery, and it was life-changing for me. I mean, it was a holy war, it was a civil war, and it was a civil movement. And it is, one of the other reasons I am so passionate about voting, because so many lost their lives.
Yep.
Young, old, certainly Black, but also white, lost their lives so that we could finally have a democracy in 1965, right? One man, one vote happened in 1965. Let's not be confused about that. I ran across a poem. I love poetry, and I ran across a poem that I wanted to share that says, "Scream, no vote, so that one day, 100 years from now, another sister will not have to dry her tears wondering where in history she lost her voice." And that is from the poet Jasmine Carr, K-A-U-R. There is nothing more important than voting. And where are we? I mean, we had our primary pushed back, and now I'm beginning to be very anxious about the general election.
Absolutely. And so what happened back in March was just a number of constitutional amendments, legislators trying to determine, what was the best course of action, particularly with our governor and our Secretary of State, LaRose, determining how best to allow people to vote. And unfortunately, when COVID truly sparked and amplified in our state, it just so happened to be like less than 24 hours before our primary election. And so the number one question that was, the most salient question was, is it deemed appropriate, or is it even safe for, Ohio registered voters to go out and still vote at their respective polling location? And of course, we all know from a public health perspective, an ethical perspective, the answer is no. And then that resulted in us extending the primary election first to June and then back to April. But once again, this was happening in such quick succession to the point where even the media was giving out, it's not the most current information.
Yeah.
So from the public's perspective, a lot of people begin to think like, oh, we have until June 28th, if I'm not mistaken, to go and vote, when in fact it was April 28th. And then also we were now implementing an entirely vote at home by mail process. And I did want to elevate the challenge with that, is because, as I love to say, if you are, someone who has spent their entire life waking up in the morning, getting dressed, putting your pin on, traveling to your polling location,
Right.
that is an experience. That is your civic duty that, as you just beautifully mentioned, Margaret, that we have fought for, we have dedicated our lives for. And so there's an intrinsic connection to the power, to the act of voting.
Yeah.
But what had happened is now so many people, a lot of the historically disenfranchised communities, are now having to vote by mail. So this process is now 3 times longer because, one, not a lot of people even knew about the absentee/vote by mail process.
Mm-hmm.
2, you expect me to go online or call our Board of Elections and complete the vote by mail application. Not the ballot, but the application.
Right.
And then you then had to mail your application to your respective Board of Elections. And mind you, I want to stop there because there are still digital inequities that exist. You have to have internet access in order to go online, go to our Secretary of State's website, our Board of Elections website, complete your vote by mail application. Then you also have to have the means to afford a printer to print it, and then you also have to have the means to afford a post-it or a stamp rather, to then mail it to your Board of Election. What then also happened, because a lot has happened in the last month, if you are then fortunate enough to mail it off to your Board of Election, you typically wait about 3 to 4 business days for the ballot to arrive.
Right.
Due to the influx of people, requesting their ballot and mailing off their application, people were waiting as long as 2 weeks for their ballots to arrive. And so the question was what do you do when the April 28th deadline is quickly arriving, but yet my ballot has not arrived? And so you end up having so many unprecedented situations arrive. And we truly do appreciate, our Board of Elections and our Secretary of State working diligently and quickly during these times. But also to address your question pertaining to what we are doing now, we have to, pertaining to the general election, we have to get creative. We have to continue to engage with our essential businesses. We have to continue to, educate them, also provide them the necessary resources pertaining to the voter registration process, because there's a very high likelihood that our voting experience that we once knew is no longer. There's a very high chance that we may, for our general election, it may be a statewide vote at home by mail election. So once again, having to educate everyone, especially our black and brown brothers and sisters, about the vote at home by mail process, and then simultaneously educating them on who is on the ballot, what are the races, what are their stands, so it's this 2-pronged approach that we have to, that we must take during these times between now and November.
So in addition to what my brother has said here, I also want to add that there was a lot of confusion because once the extended primary election happened by legislation, the Secretary of State's office sort of merged its existing data on its website, which talked about how to do absentee voting with this extension of the primary, the May primary. There was one particular error that we found, and that's another thing. You can depend on organizations like your NAACP, your Urban League, to stay vigilant about, like with Cleveland Votes, to watch out for these kind of inaccuracies so we can jump on them right away. So I have a cell phone to cell phone relationship with the Secretary of State's office. I text them and said, hello, we got Houston, we have a problem.
Yes.
You have told people that they must have their application for the ballot in by the Saturday before the election, okay? Or it may be in by 2 p.m. the day before the election. However, in all the other data that the Secretary of State had published, they were only observing the Saturday before the election date. So, and there were organizations that had copied the information from the Secretary of State's website.
Of course.
And given out this information to the community, and people thought they could actually go and turn it in the day before, and they would have been, so we jumped on that right away, got statements out to the community, let people know. And I think the other thing, Devontae, that's important for us to communicate to people is people were able to drop off their applications to the Board of Elections. But again, you got to have transportation or a way to get down there, right? So, you know, that can sometimes be a barrier. But you were able to do that. And of course, I think they did an amazing job the day of the election on April 28th, because they actually had people out on the streets collecting ballots. People you weren't to go in, they could collect your mail ballot. And they also made provisions for anyone who did not get their ballot by mail on time to be able to go into the Board of Elections and vote a provisional ballot that day. So we worked with the Secretary of State's office to try to, you know, work around these inaccuracies that had happened and to try to make sure wherever possible that we could get some of those inaccuracies cured. The final thing I will say is we're getting ahead of the curve now. And one of the things that the civil rights organizations are going to be doing is going to the Secretary of State and saying, look, well, we need to be, if we're going to have a total vote by mail, you need to mail the ballots. And they need to have return postage. Forget this application for a ballot. You know who the voters are. Send the ballots to the people like they do in many other states who are voting by mail and have been now for several years and are getting a pretty good turnout with their voter population. So those are some of the kinds of things that I think we need to be doing when you talk about solutions, Margaret, to get ahead of the curve on this.
That is great advocacy. I mean, you know, voter suppression takes so many forms these days. You know, we know that there were poll taxes. We know that there were literacy tests. And, you know, that's not how suppression shows up. It is very, very, you know, subtle, intentional, unintentional. And it is so important. This is really excellent advocacy on behalf of people of color, and I'm thrilled to be able to see that. What is it going to look like for Cleveland Votes in real time over the summer and through the fall as we come running into November 3rd for the general election?
Absolutely. So as of right now, Cleveland Votes, we are actively working with our, community partners, nonprofits, CDCs, to help them like strategize and determine like what does that voter registration like process and, strategies look like. Because once again, we know as Cleveland Votes, we are not the experts. We are the conveners. We are the educators. We are the supporters. We want to support our local nonprofits and our local organizations and allowing them to, pioneer that process. But once again, we have a number of other strategies, such as continuing to elevate, the digital space, the digital realm. As we often jokingly say, talking about voting, we don't, it doesn't need to be this very convoluted process. If you have a Zoom call or if you're talking to loved ones, especially during this time of physical distancing, like just drop in the topic of census and voting. Ask your family and friends if they have updated their voter registration, or in fact, completed their voter registration. Talk about the issues that are pertaining to your communities. And of course, if you need any resources pertaining to those, elected officials, their stance on issues that you are passionate about, we are more than happy to direct you to a set of phenomenal resources. Once again, as we are continuing to practice physical distancing, we are continuing to support and work with local essential businesses, and making sure that we continue to provide them the necessary voter registration forms and voter education documents and resources that they can then embed, especially as they are continuing to deliver groceries and deliver essential life items to communities. That way people can simultaneously obtain their groceries, but also learn about what is going to happen in November. And then lastly too, we have done a number of creative activities, such as doing voter registration, vote by mail drive-throughs in collaboration with a number of local partners, in which, as we jokingly say, like doing it like Sonic style, where cars come in, they stop. There are various stations in the parking lot. You can come and safely complete your vote by mail application, and then also get PPE, because we also know that a lot of minorities and historically disenfranchised communities do not have very clear and easy access to PPE. So as well as providing free lunches, free breakfasts. That way people can obtain these items while also simultaneously learning and actually doing and participating in the civic process.
Where have you done that? I love that. That is a powerful, powerful idea and tool that I think we can want to do more of. Where have you done that?
Absolutely. So we actually did it in the Glenville area. Apologies for forgetting the church, but it is a church in the Glenville area.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful idea. Able to get registered, get PPE, and get a meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those are the creative solutions that we have to think about during this time. We know that we can't do the typical tabling, person to person interaction. So thank you so much, Erica. We have to be very cognizant about providing our Black and Brown communities the resources that they need, especially due to COVID, while, in tandem, educating them about the civic process, providing them voter registration forms safely, and then also directing them to our Secretary of State's and Board of Elections website, so that they can continue to learn like what is on their ballot and who will be on their ballot.
Again, just that ability, that we've talked about, using these channels, communities of faith, wherever food is being distributed, making sure that the census voter registration is a part of this, opportunity, and adding PPE is critical for our critical workforce, which often has a very brown and Black face in our community. So I love all of this. It's good. It's good. I want to ask you to tell me what scares you, what concerns you about the coming election. What is your big concern, so that we can combat it? When where the boogeyman is,
Yeah.
you're
Don't
ready.
get me started, Margaret. I got to behave.
We've got to be ready. This is probably the most important election in my lifetime.
Yeah.
The most important election in my lifetime.
We continue to say 2020 is and this is prior to COVID, but I know like we, at Cleveland Votes, we have consistently said 2020 is going to dictate like so many things. Not, oftentimes when we think about policy and advocacy, you think, about the implications 7 years prior, but you also have to think about the implications 7 years ahead. And what does that mean? But pertaining to your question about fear, that is a big question. And I think it's just the biggest fear is just the capacity. Like we have to acknowledge that a lot of our partners who are very accustomed to conducting voter registration drives and voter registration efforts, it's their bread and butter. Like they know how to do it like the back of their hand. And so now due to COVID, like it is now everyone's efforts, everyone's theory of change, everyone's, activities and strategies are completely flipped over its head. And so it's now a matter of us truly encouraging all of us to practice, creativity and to truly test our creative thinking skills and saying like, hey, although we can't do what we did last year or, the last election, what are some creative and amazing ways we can still, elevate and educate and connect, our communities and our partners on the importance of the election, especially between now and November.
One thing I want to do, because I've been watching The Last Dance, and Michael Jordan, uber competitive. But I just think, I was thinking this morning, should we have a competition with like Detroit and Pittsburgh, like who could have the highest census and who could have the highest voter turnout? I mean, we do not want to be behind Detroit or Pittsburgh. We need to throw it down and do this thing, Cleveland. I mean, we need to figure out how we're going to really engage people. And, a lot of us are missing our fixes around sports. And, so we need to identify new competition. And I just keep thinking, how can we get our mayors involved, or our comparative organizations in each of these cities, let alone the 3 C's, getting a competition going.
Absolutely.
So that's my little thing for the day. Marsha, I want to hear from you and what's keeping you up.
My biggest fear is this, and someone kind of already hit it on our chat with a question about, is it possible that the election might be postponed?
Ooh.
I know. Yeah.
That's like a House of Cards reality.
Given and last year, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, my standard answer would have been never.
Never.
Given the responses that we see coming out of the executive branch now that don't necessarily align with the Constitution or don't necessarily align with standard protocol and procedures, that just seem to override based on priorities within the White House, I would not be surprised at a challenge. And especially when we look at everything for the incumbent person in the White House that was going to probably build the platform for re-election having been destroyed with COVID-19. So I think we're going to have to stay vigilant. I know the National Urban League, Mark Morial, does a great job in working with the other civil rights organizations, NAACP, the National Lawyers Committee, National Action Network, and others. they're going to stay vigilant around that. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a challenge or a question raised when you think the census has already been delayed. A number of things with opening of the country and all those things. And I think that if the reopening of the country doesn't create increased job numbers quickly enough and increase economic movement fast enough, that we very well could see a challenge. That's my biggest fear.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is.
That's a nightmare. That doesn't get us moving. We need to get in gear. We need to be asking what is happening to ensure a safe and equitable election in November. I love the simplicity and the seamlessness of your advocacy around the mail-in vote, making sure the postage is there, not having to get an application. So much of this is what to be happening. The work of the Urban League is critical. Please remember them in your giving. The work of Cleveland Votes is critical and is absolutely needed in 2020 and every year. Please remember them in your giving. Of course, we appreciate your support here at the YWCA. This has been an amazing, amazing dialogue. Devontae, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I like the mustache. And I just, you are one of our young princes who is ascending to the throne, to the as a king, as a young king. And just, I am overly emotional about my Black brothers this week. It's been a difficult week and a difficult day as we think about Ahmaud Arbery.
Yes.
And Marcia, she's just been a dear, dear sister. It's some dark days for me, and I love you. And I hope you all will be back with us next week. We are going to be looking at education. We are going to have Erica Merritt with us. We're going to have Adam King. I'm so excited for you to hear from Adam King, who is on the pulse of this digital divide. And Mark Swain Fox is also going to join us next week for a very important conversation about education in the midst of this COVID crisis. And we have certainly seen, we knew the disparities, we knew the impact segregation in 2020 was having on our education system, but COVID-19 has certainly shone a light on this. Please continue to advocate, everyone out there, on this issue. Talk about this issue, raise up, make sure you take the census. Be a soldier, get someone else, go online, encourage. I love the idea of the drive-in, voting registration, census registration, PPE, and food. I love that combination. We can do this. Everybody have a great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.